This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Baruch Haba, welcome everyone. Tonight we're going to speak about the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar. Tonight's Shiur is sponsored by my close yedid, Rabbi Moshe Morgenstern, Le'iloi Nishmas, his daughter Rezel Bas Moshe Aaron, on her first yard site. And it says in Shiurim that there are times where the Rebbeinu Shalom comes to be Lilkoit Bas Shoshanim, to take the roses. And I feel very close to the Morgenstern family over this past year, and certainly I'm at a complete loss of words to offer the proper nechama, but we know that this was an instance where the Rebbeinu Shalom took back one of his precious Shoshanim, and it should be a zchus for the Morgenstern family and for all of Klal Yisrael. Amen. Okay, so we're going to talk about the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar. Sounds pretty simple enough. Blow the shofar. What exactly is the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar? What I would like to offer you tonight are basically the two approaches in the Rishonim, and to bring the two approaches closer together and offer, I would like to consider the definitive understanding of the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar al pi halacha. Okay, so we begin with the smag. Interesting, the smag is one of the Balei HaTosis of Moshe Mikutzi. In fact, if you look in Masechta Yuma, the Tosis Yushanim in Masechta Yuma was written by the smag, was written by Moshe Mikutzi. And he wrote a Sefer HaMitzvos. We know we have a tradition based on the Gemara on the end of Makos that there are 613 mitzvahs. By the way, it's not unanimous that there are 613 mitzvahs. The Rambam says that's Reb Simloi's opinion. It doesn't mean everybody agrees to that. It could be others hold there are much more than 613 mitzvahs. But it's become that the tradition in Klal Yisrael is that there are 613 mitzvahs, and all the Rishonim discuss what exactly are the 613 mitzvahs. And the Smag writes in Mitzvah Membeis, Mitzvahs aseh litkaya b'shofar. The mitzvah d'oraisa is to blow the shofar. And obviously, if you don't blow the shofar, you blew it. So, according to the Smag, the mitzvah is to blow the shofar. Okay, doesn't sound like much of a chiddush. The Shiltis of Rav Achoy Goin, one of the Goinim. By the way, very interesting, the history of the Shiltis. You know, before the Shiltis is a revolutionary sefer. Before the Shiltis, anybody who wrote halacha like the Rambam. You just codify halacha based on various topics. Nobody codified halacha based on the Parsha HaShavua. That was considered like a big innovation. That was like a new thing. The Shiltis was the first one to invent the concept. After him, everybody does it, from the Rishonim to the Achronim till contemporary. And the reason why the Shiltis did it is the Shiltis had a son, who it's written, Loi haya loi made klum. And he had to come up with a new approach to teaching Torah. You know, people want to know, could you teach with a smartboard? It's not the Messiah. The Messiah is, you do what works. That's the Messiah. Messiah is, teach Torah to your children. And this is something you learn from the Rabbi Chayigain. Nobody before him did this type of presentation, and he made a new presentation to be effective. Anyway, he writes in Siman Kuf Ayin Aleph, Shilta demechayvin beis Yisrael lemiska. Klal Yisrael is chayiv to blow. Okay, up. But then he adds, and what's the bracha? Umavarech. Baruch atah Hashem Eloheinu melech asher kiddush lanu mitzvosav. V'tzivanu litkaya b'shofar. Litkaya b'shofar. The nusach, the text of the bracha is blow the shofar. That Hashem commanded us to blow the shofar. The Rosh quotes Rabbeinu Tam. By the way, the Rosh writes in a tshuva, Rabbeinu Tam was the greatest of all the Rishonim, b'chachma u'b'minyan. That's why Ashkenazim follow Rabbeinu Tam. We maintain that Rabbeinu Tam was the greatest of all the Rishonim. Interesting. Rabbeinu Tam writes, Yesh levarech al tekiyas shofar. You should make a bracha blowing the shofar. So here we have what seems to be three sources in the Rishonim, that the mitzvah is to blow. The Smag says the mitzvah is to blow. The Shota says the mitzvah is to blow, and therefore the text of the bracha is Litzkaya b'shofar. The Rosh says the mitzvah is to blow, and therefore the bracha is al tkei shofar. Comes the Rambam, and the Rambam could not write in more places that the mitzvah is completely different. The mitzvah is not to blow the shofar. The Rambam writes, now I heard a lot of the Marmakoimos from the Shiur I took from a Sefer Yom HaZikaron of Rabbi Yonason Sachs. Rabbi Yonason Avnei Sachs is Rosh Yeshiva in Landers, and he said he heard this from Rav Soloveitchik, but I'm going to say over the same Chiddush in the name of others as well. And he's a tremendous Baki. He's a Baki Nifla. He has everything on his fingertips. He said over many times, the Rambam writes in 7 places what the mitzvah of shofar is. So I'm going to have one humble addition. I found an 8th place where the Rambam writes this. The Rambam writes, now interesting, whenever you see the Rambam, besides the halachos, he has like a little heading before he begins a subject. So before, let's say, Hilchos Megillah, before Hilchos Chanukah, before Hilchos Shabbos, he has a little, it's Kaiseres, a little title. Is a Kaiseres to Hilchos Shofar. He writes, Lishmoya kol shofar, to hear the sound of the shofar, not to blow, to hear. The Rambam, look at number 5, Hilchos Shofar, Parak Aleph, Halacha Aleph, Mitzvahs Aseh, Shal Torah, Lishmoya, to hear, to listen. And it actually makes a nafkamina halach. In other words, now we have 2 approaches. The Smag, the Shotis, the Rabbeinu Tam, they seem to say the mitzvah is to blow. The Rambam seems to say the mitzvah is to listen. And it makes a tremendous nafkamina lahalacha. How's that? L'chayra, if the mitzvah was to blow the shofar, if you steal a shofar and you blow it, you wouldn't be yotzei. Because the item, the chefza, is a stolen chefza. The same way you can't be yotzei with maybe stolen matzah or a stolen sukkah. If you steal a shofar, you wouldn't be yotzei. But comes the Rambam, and the Rambam says in Parak Aleph Halacha Gimel that if you steal a shofar, you're yotzei. Why? You know why? Because there's no mitzvah to blow a shofar. A shofar is not a chefza shel mitzvah. A shofar is merely the instrument to produce the sound. The mitzvah is to listen to the sound. So you stole the shofar, so what? You didn't steal a chefza shel mitzvah. A shofar is not an item of a mitzvah according to the Rambam. There's no mitzvah to blow a shofar. When someone blows a shofar, they are not doing one of the 613 mitzvahs. Listening to the shofar is one of the 613 mitzvahs. In other words, if you blew shofar with earplugs in your ears, according to the Rambam, you wouldn't be yotzei. Because you didn't do anything. You just blow. There's no mitzvah to blow. The mitzvah is to listen. And therefore, look at number 6. The Rambam writes, Shofar hagazul yatsa she'ein mitzvah ela b'shmias hakoil. The mitzvah is only to listen. Or the Rambam, Parak Beis, Halacha Aleph, Hakoil Chayavin Lishmoya. The Rambam in the Sefer HaMitzvos writes, the 170th mitzvah in the Torah is Lishmoya, to listen. Then the Rambam, besides his list of the 613 mitzvahs, he has a minyan hakotzer, a very brief listing, and he writes, Lishmoya kol shofar b'Rosh Hashanah. And this is my edition, this is my big hamtzah. The Rambam has a list of the 613 mitzvahs. How many of them do you have to do? In other words, they're not circumstantial. They're not dependent on a circumstance. You must do them. He has a list of 60. And mitzvah 45 is Lishmaya Koil Shofar. And then finally, the Rambam wrote Chuvas HaRambam, which is called Shal Chuvas Pe'er Hadar. And the Rambam wants to know, what is the nafkamina between listening to a shofar and blowing it? And what is the nafkamina in the nusach, in the terminology, in the phraseology of a bracha? What difference would it make if you made a bracha to listen to a shofar or to blow the shofar? And the Rambam says there's a tremendous difference. That if the mitzvah is to listen, then if you heard and you didn't blow, you would be yotzei. But if the mitzvah is to blow, then what would the halacha be if you blew the shofar and you put your fingers in your ears? Then you would be yotzei the mitzvah. Because you blew. Why would you have to hear? So there's a tremendous difference. Is the mitzvah to blow or is the mitzvah to hear? If the mitzvah is to hear, then just listening to the sound of the shofar, you'll be yotzei. If the mitzvah is to blow, then if you blew and you didn't hear the sound, then you would be yotzei. Says the Rambam, certainly if you heard and you didn't blow, you're vada yotzei. And if you blew and you didn't hear, you're definitely not yotzei. Says the Rambam, blowing a shofar is like building a sukkah. Is there a mitzvah in the Torah to build a sukkah? No. It's not a mitzvah in the Torah. There's no mitzvah in the Torah to build a sukkah. What? Teishvu. There's a mitzvah to sit in a sukkah. There's no mitzvah in the Torah to build a sukkah. You could have a guy build a sukkah. There's no mitzvah to build a sukkah. The mitzvah is to sit in the sukkah. So too, there's no mitzvah to blow the shofar, the Rambam says. The mitzvah is to listen to the shofar. That's the opinion of the Rambam in no less than 8 places. So we have a major machlokes. The Smag, the Shiltis, Rabbeinu Tam, they say the mitzvah is to blow. The Rambam apparently feels very strongly the mitzvah is to listen. And I tell you something very interesting. Most Balei Toikeya, they have the custom that when they make the bracha on the shofar, at the time they're making the bracha, the shofar is hidden. It's covered. It's in the bag. It's in the zekel. It's covered by a sheet. We mentioned this on Monday. L'chayra asked Avnei Nezer and Simon Taf Lamed Aleph the minhag of covering the shofar. Now, where does it come from? Some say it comes from. It says tiku b'chodesh shofar ba'kesa. You want to hide the shofar. It says it should be hidden. But says the Avnei Nezer, l'chayra, the minhag of covering the shofar is keneged halacha. Why? Because there's a rule that whenever you make a bracha on a mitzvah, the bracha always has to be over l'asiyasam. It has to be immediately prior to the performance of the mitzvah. You don't make a bracha on a talis and then whip it out of the bag, because then the bracha would be too far in advance. So basically what you do is, you take it out of the bag. By the way, just a quick halachic reminder, when you do an atifa on a talis, and you lift up the talis from behind you, often people lift it up all the way up to the neck. It's not correct. You have to be covering at least part of the back, because the ikar atifa is atifas haguf, not atifas harosh. So you have to remember, don't lift it up all the way up to your neck. At least for Ashkenazim, you have to at least be covering the top of the shoulders, otherwise it's not a good atifa. But you hold up the talis, and then you make the bracha right before the atifa, so that the bracha is over l'asiyasam. When do you make a bracha on tefillin? You can't make a bracha when it's in the bag, because then it would be too much of a hefsek between the bracha and the performance of the mitzvah. So you take the tefillin out of the bag, you even put it on your arm, you almost make the knot, and then you make the bracha so that immediately after making the bracha, you perform the mitzvah. In fact, it is so important to make the bracha immediately prior to the performance of the mitzvah, that if there would be a mitzvah that you can't make a bracha right before, Chazal would never ordain a bracha in such a circumstance. For example, the Ran says in Psachim, that when a person gets married, so nowadays we get married through Kiddushay Kesef. A man gives a ring to a woman. By the way, why a ring? It's Kiddushay Kesef. Give her $1. Why a ring? Interesting. It's Alpi the Zoyar. One of the only times the Ramah brings halacha b'shem the Zoyar. A ring is not halacha. You could give Kesef, Shavak, you give barley. I'm not saying she would accept the barley, but you could Kesef or Shavak Kesef. The concept of a round ring is Alpi Kabbalah, but the Ramah mentions it from the Zoyar. And we know we make a bracha. The Masada Kedushin makes the bracha. According to many, it's a bracha mitzvah, and it's immediately prior to the Kedushin. But what about this man HaGemara? There's a type of Kedushin, Kedushay Biyah. Is there a bracha on Kedushay Biyah? There's no such bracha. Why not? The Ran says like this. Because B'shas Maisa, it's lo yira b'cher vas davar. Elamai, before you can't make a bracha. It's too far in advance. So since it's too far in advance, there's no bracha at all. So frek the Avnei Nezer, if you're going to cover the shofar at the time of the bracha, it's going to be a hefsek between the bracha and whipping out the shofar. So how are you allowed to cover the shofar? Says the Avnei Nezer, according to the Shita of the Rambam, we could explain as follows. According to the Rambam, what's a shofar? Nothing. Shofar is nothing. Shofar is a tool with which you produce the sound. The sound is the item of the mitzvah. The shofar is the tool with which you produce it. In other words, if I were to ask you, what's the hammer with which you make a sukkah? Nothing! Nothing! So the shofar is also, it's the tool with which you produce the sound. Memela, you make a bracha, not al tikiyah shofar, lishmaya koil shofar. It's very embarrassing for the shofar. The bracha is very embarrassing for the shofar. You're relegating the shofar to a second-class citizen. You're making the shofar into a hammer. So the same way, says Avnei Nezer, we cover challah when you make kiddush ala yayin, because you're basically rejecting the challah. We're not making kiddush on the challah. When you make a bracha on a shofar, you're rejecting the shofar. It's like you're relegating the shofar to a second-class citizen, and therefore we cover it up so it shouldn't hear the bracha. Anyway, in any event, we have these two approaches to understanding the mitzvah of shofar. The smag, the shiltis, Rabbeinu Tam, the mitzvah is to blow. The mitzvah is to blow. And therefore the bracha should be al tikiyah shofar. The Rambam says the mitzvah is lishmaya, to listen. Comes the Rosh, and the Rosh says the correct bracha on shofar, he quotes the Raviyah, and he quotes the Bahag. The correct bracha on shofar is what? L'shmaya b'kol shofar. To listen to the sound of the shofar. Why? Says the Rosh, I'll prove to you that the mitzvah has to be to listen. You know what the proof is? What's the halacha if you blow shofar in a pit and you can't hear the sound of the shofar, you could just hear the echo? Are you yotze or you're not yotze? You're not yotze. If the mitzvah is to blow, why in the world are you not yotze? You blew. So what, you didn't hear it? You blew. The fact that if you blow in a pit, if you don't hear the sound of the shofar, you're not yotze, that proves conclusively that the Rambam is correct, that the mitzvah is to listen, because the mitzvah is to blow in the pit. Who cares if you don't hear it? And therefore, the Rosh seems to conclude that that's the correct bracha, based on the fact that we know ha toikeya l'toich habar im kol shofar shama yatsa im lav kol shofar shama lo yatsa. So I don't think we ever quoted this this sefer before. It's an early achron, I believe. Shal Shachus Maram El Ashakar. He says like this: really, I'll tell you, the mitzvah is to blow the shofar. So why if you blow in a pit and you don't hear it, lo yatsa? He says, Hagabatzmacha. Think about the following scenario. What's the mitzvah of Shema? What's the mitzvah, right? We have a mitzvah of Shema. What's the mitzvah? Kriya Shema, right? You got to say the words. Let's say you said it, but you couldn't hear it. It's not a good saying. Why? The mitzvah is not to hear Shema. The mitzvah is to say Shema. The answer is, yes, the mitzvah is to say Shema. But if it's not audible to the ear, it's not good enough. It's not considered hearing. It's not considered saying. It has to be a saying that's audible to the ear. It doesn't mean listening is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is saying it. But it's not a good saying it if you don't hear it. Now, the truth is, b'diavad, if you didn't hear it, you are yotza. But it's just a mashal, the Maram al-Ashakar says. The same way, by Shema, the mitzvah is to say Shema, but at the same time it has to be audible to the ear. The same thing by shofar. I'll tell you, really, Rabbeinu Tam is right, and the smag is right, and the shiltis is right. The mitzvah is to blow. But if it's a blowing that's not audible to the ear, that's not called a blowing. In other words, the ear has to participate, despite the fact that the mitzvah is not to listen. Okay, so we have these two opinions. The smag, the shiltis, Rabbeinu Tam, blow the shofar. The Rambam, listen to the shofar. We're going to bring a Gemara now, a Mishnah, which you tell me what this Mishnah shows. Cheresh, a deaf person. Someone who can't, a deaf mute. Shoita, dumb. Katan, a minor. Ein moitzin asaram dechavasan, cannot be the Baal Tekeah. Why not? Ze'aklal, here's a rule. Kol she'enoi mechuyev b'davar. Anyone who's not obligated in a mitzvah, enoi moitzi es harabim midei chayvasan, cannot be moitzi the tzibur. If you're not chayiv yourself, you can't be moitzi others. Anyone who's not mechuyev cannot be moitzi the rabbim their chiyav. What do you see from this Mishnah? Bishlam of the mitzvah is to blow the shofar. I get. A cheresh shayta v'katan cannot blow the shofar for me. The mitzvah is to blow. He is doing my mitzvah for me. He's my shliach. If he's not chayiv in the mitzvah, he can't be moitzi me in blowing. But if the mitzvah is to listen, he's not being moitzi me in anything. He's not doing anything. He's just creating a sound. How am I yotzei the mitzvah? I'm yotzei the mitzvah. He's not doing it for me. He's just creating a sound. I'm being yotzei myself by listening. So who cares if he's a cheresh shayta v'katan? He's not being moitzi me anyway. He's merely providing me a sound. I'm listening to it myself. Why is the halacha cheresh shayta v'katan can't blow shofar for the tzibur? If the mitzvah is to blow, I understand. He can't blow for me. But if the mitzvah is to listen, I'm listening. He's not listening. He's just creating this sound. I heard it. I'm bar chiyuva. It's a pella. It's a pella on the Rambam. Bishlama, the Smag, and the Shiltis, and Rabbeinu Tam. This Gemara seems to prove that the mitzvah is to blow the shofar, and that's why he can't blow for me. But if the mitzvah is to listen, he ain't doing anything for me. I'm doing it myself. Who cares if he's a cheresh shayta v'katan? Good kasha, right? So, the Shagas Aryeh in Siman Vav says, you see from this Mishnah, sort of, the Rambam's not correct. That you want to say there's a mitzvah to listen? Fine! There also is a mitzvah to blow. Because if the mitzvah is only to listen, then why can't the cheresh shayta v'katan blow the shofar and I'm listening? The fact that cheresh shayta v'katan cannot blow the shofar indicates the mitzvah is not only to listen, there's a mitzvah to blow also. And that's the conclusion of the Shagas Aryeh. Basically, that there are two parts of the mitzvah. In other words, tefillin, there's one mitzvah, just put it on your arm. Talis, wrap yourself. Mezuzah, put it on the door. Shofar! We've proven there are two parts of the mitzvah. The fact that if you blow in a pit, you can't hear it, you're not yotzei, that shows you need to hear it. The fact that a cheresh shayta v'katan can't blow it for you means you got to blow it. So basically, the Rambam cannot stand on himself, by himself. Again, what we see from this Gemara, that a cheresh shayta v'katan can't be moitzi so in their chiyuv, why not? If the mitzvah is just to listen, I'm listening. I'm hearing, I'm all ears. He's not performing a mitzvah for me. He's basically just the guy creating the sound, but the mitzvah is to listen. So I'm listening. I'm a bar chiyuva. That shows, says the Shagas Aryeh, that there are two parts of the mitzvah. There's a mitzvah to listen, but there must also be a mitzvah to blow. And in order to get the mitzvah, you need to fulfill both. The problem, though, is that's not what the Rambam seems to say. The Rambam says the mitzvah is to listen. It doesn't say anything about blowing. If there would be a mitzvah to blow, that doesn't fit. Then why would the Rambam say you could use a stolen shofar? If there's a mitzvah to blow, how could you use a stolen shofar? Then the shofar is a chefza shel mitzvah, which is gazol. So the Shagas Aryeh is entitled to come to the conclusion that there are two parts of the mitzvah. But the Rambam is sort of in trouble. How is the Rambam going to deal with the Mishnah that says a cheresh shayta v'katan ein moitziin es harabim midei chayvasan? Why can't a cheresh shayta v'katan blow the shofar for somebody else if the mitzvah is only to listen? So the Levush says something slightly mysterious. The Levush says like this: even though the mitzvah is to listen, but you cannot be yotzei the mitzvah of shofar from somebody who is not mechuyev. Why? Since Hashem doesn't want it, how could he be moitzi others? That's what the Levush says in number 18. That since Hashem does not want it, how could he be mitzi others? Question is, what do you mean since Hashem doesn't want it, how can he mitzi others? He's not being mitzi anybody. The mitzvah is to listen. He's not the cheresh is not being mitzi me. So what exactly does the levush mean? So the Chazon Ish and the Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank and the Mikrai Kodesh, they say the following. Listen very carefully. This is we're starting to get the first level of understanding. They say like this: really, the mitzvah is to listen to the sound of the shofar. But question: let's say a guy gets up in shul and he blows the horn of a unicorn, or he blows the horn of a zebra, or an antelope. You're yotze or you're not yotze? You're not yotze? But what do you mean? The mitzvah is to hear. I heard. Why can't you blow with any instrument? Let's say a guy goes into shul and he honks his horn, the horn of his car. I'm yotze, I heard. The answer is shkoyach, but you have to hear the sound of a shofar. A cherei shoit of a katan cannot produce a halachic sound. Since they're not mechuyev in the mitzvah, they cannot produce a halachic sound of the shofar. Yes, the Rambam is correct. The mitzvah is only to listen to the sound of the shofar. But a cherei shoit of a katan, they're not being moitzi me. It's not that since they're not mechuyev in the mitzvah, they can't be moitzi me. They don't need to be moitzi me. But it's a little bit deeper than that. It's they cannot create a halachic shofar blast. Because since they're not mechuyev in the mitzvah, they're blowing, the sound that they produce is not a halachic sound. So yes, I'm a bar chiyuva and I'm listening, but I'm not listening to a tkiyah shofar the mitzvah. They don't have to be moitzi me. That's not the problem. The problem is they can't create the proper sound. Look at the Chazon Ish says it very briefly in number 19. V'chein le'inyan tkiyah shofar eino yotze b'shmiya ela b'kol shofar shel mitzvah. You can only be yotze by listening to the kol shofar of a mitzvah. V'hilkach eino yotze mecherei shoita v'katan. Therefore, you're not yotze from a cherei shoita v'katan. Right, that's the same thing. In other words, according to the Rambam, for sure a guy cannot blow the shofar. Why? Why not? Because he's not mechuyev, so what? But I'm hearing a shofar, that's I'm not hearing tkiyah the mitzvah. He can't create a halachic sound. Okay. But so far the Rambam is still doing well. In other words, we don't have to come to the conclusion of the Shagas Aryeh. Right? Shagas Aryeh says, if a cherei shoit v'katan can't blow the shofar, that must be because there are two parts of the mitzvah. There's a mitzvah to listen, and there's a mitzvah to blow. And they can't be moitzi me in the mitzvah to blow. No, you don't have to say there's a mitzvah to blow. You could say like the Rambam, the mitzvah is only to listen. Why can't a cherei shoit v'katan blow? Because they're not capable of producing a tkiyah shofar, the mitzvah, for me to hear a halachic tkiyah.
What about a video? If somebody blows it?
No. A video?
Yeah,
look, I'm all for videos on Torah, but you're not going to get tkiyah shofar that way. How are you going to watch it on Rosh Hashanah? No, but even so, it's not going to work.
They actually have an app.
They have a shofar app? Okay. Yeah, it ain't going to work. But so here's $1 million question. So the Rambam's still doing well, and l'chara we go like the Rambam because our nusach habracha lishmaya kol shofar. Why can't a cherei shoit v'katan blow for me? Because he can't produce a halachic sound. Here's the $1 million question: what's a halacha if a Baal Tekeah blows shofar and he's a full-fledged bar chiyuva, and I'm outside the shul, let's say in the front, and I listen to his shofar on Rosh Hashanah? So here, l'chara, we have all the ingredients. I heard it. He blew it. He's chayiv in mitzvahs. One problem. He didn't have me in mind. Yatsa or la yatsa? La yatsa. The Rambam Paskins, look at number 21. The Rambam says, Niskavein shomeya lotze sidei chayvasai. If the listener had in mind to be yotze l'chiyuv, v'loi niskavein ha'tokeah l'hoitzioi, and the blower didn't have in mind to moitzi him, lo yatsa. Now the listener heard. And about Tokeah, he's 90 years old, he has a long white beard. He's for sure Mechuyev mitzvahs. He's not a cherish. His hearing is good. What are you missing? He didn't have the guy in mind. Why in the world does he have to have the guy in mind? I understand the cherish can't blow the shofar for someone because he can't produce a halachic sound. If he's not chayiv in mitzvahs, he's not creating a kol shofar. But here he's not a cherish we're dealing with a bar chiyuva. And he blew the shofar. He didn't have the guy in mind? For what? You're not moitzi anybody in anything. The mitzvah is to hear. The mitzvah is to hear the sound of the shofar. I heard the sound of the shofar. He blew a sound of a shofar. He didn't have me in mind. What does he have to have me in mind for? I have a question for you. If you have a guy build a sukkah for you, and he didn't have in mind to build it for you, it's a problem? Of course not. He built the sukkah. I'm sitting in it. You don't have to have in mind the person you're building it for, because you're not being moitzi, the sitter in the sukkah, at anything. L'chayra, according to the Rambam, the mitzvah is to hear the sound of the shofar. Okay, it has to be the sound of a bar chiyuva. It has to be halachic sound. So it's a halachic sound. So what if the Tokeah didn't have the listener in mind? You hear the kasha? The bracha is not ma'akev, right? Even if, let's say, no bracha is made, you're still yotzei the mitzvah. But the Rambam says, lo yotzei, you don't even get the mitzvah. So the Chazon Ish says, look at number 22, the Chazon Ish says, well, if you don't have your friend in mind, then for him it's not a shofar, it's not the sound of a shofar. What does that mean? Why is it not the sound of the shofar? The guy blew a shofar, he was blowing it for himself, and it was a tekiah de mitzvah, the listener heard it, so what if he didn't have it in mind? He's not being moitzi the listener in anything. The mitzvah is to listen. In fact, there's a sefer Bayish Shloimeh who asks very straight out that l'chayra, there's no way to explain why in the Rambam the mitzvah is to listen, why the Tokeah has to have in mind the listener. He's not being moitzi him in anything. He's merely producing a sound and the listener is being yotzi on his own. Says the Bayish Shloimeh, oh, it must be the Shagas Aryeh is right. There are two parts of the mitzvah. There's a mitzvah to listen, and there must be a mitzvah to blow also. But again, that's not what the Rambam says. The Rambam, who says there's only a mitzvah to listen, how in the world do we explain the idea that the blower has to have the listener in mind? Why in the world would you have to have the listener in mind? You're not being moitzi the listener in anything. Okay, everyone hear the question? What we're asking is, let's just say it clearly, according to the Rambam, that the mitzvah is to listen to the sound of the shofar. Okay, I understand why a cherei shoit v'katan can't blow, because then you would not be listening to halachic sound. But why is the halacha that if a gadol blows the shofar and he doesn't have in mind to be yotzei the listener, why can the listener not be yotzei? After all, he's listening to tekiah de mitzvah. What is lacking? What is missing? There's nothing missing here. So I'm going to tell you a chiddush now. I heard Rabbi Sachs say it over in the name of Rav Hershel Shechter, who says it over in the name of Rav Soloveitchik. And that's in the Sefer Eretz HaTzvi. Rav Shechter wrote a Sefer Eretz HaTzvi. I heard many, many years ago from a rabbi in Eretz Yisrael. His name is Rabbi Emanuel Bernstein, who is the son of one of my favorite old-time Rabbanim, Rav Isaac Bernstein, that he said it over from the Avnei Nezer. I couldn't find the Avnei Nezer, so I actually emailed him, and he emailed me the Maramachon. So this is also Chiddush on the Avnei Nezer. A few hours ago, I found that this is actually what the Chidushei Hagrach says. Reb Chaim Brisker says this idea. In the newest edition of Reb Chaim al Hashas, they bring this from Reb Chaim. Reb Ruderman, Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael, also says this, and he says it b'shem Rav Yisrael Salanter. So this is a very miyusadik idea. This has a lot of firm basis. Basically, Rabbi Say, just appreciate Shas is putting the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar in a very tight spot. On the one hand, if you blow in a pit and you don't hear it, you're not yotzei. So obviously, the mitzvah is listening. On the other hand, if you don't have in mind to be moitzi the listener, he's not yotzei. That means the mitzvah is blowing. And is it both? The Rambam says it's only listening. So I'm going to tell you a breathtaking idea. Just really open up your concept of mitzvahs in general. Just understanding mitzvahs. It's really, the way the Avnei Nezer says it, it's breathtaking. Rav Shechter gives other examples. I believe they're both saying the same idea. Every mitzvah has two parts. Every mitzvah has the act, and every mitzvah has the kiyum, the fulfillment. But 99% of the time, it's the exact same thing. The act is the fulfillment, and fulfillment is the act. Lamashal, tefillin. What's the act of tefillin? Tying your tefillin. What's the fulfillment of the mitzvah? Tying the tefillin. It's the same exact thing. The act and the kiyum is the same thing. Tzitzis. The act is wrapping yourself in the tzitzis. The fulfillment is wrapping yourself in the tzitzis. Sitting in the sukkah. The mitzvah is, the act is sitting in the sukkah. The fulfillment is sitting in the sukkah. It's the exact same thing. So he said, what are you talking about? They're not always the same thing. Let me give you the example that the Avnei Nezer gives in Siman Mem. The last mitzvah in the Torah is what? Yata Kisvu lachem es ashir hazos. Writing a Sefer Torah. What's the act of the mitzvah? Writing the Sefer Torah or appointing someone to write it for you. Yeah? What's the halacha if you write a Sefer Torah and you give it to a shul? You lose the mitzvah. You lose the mitzvah. Yeah. You heard that? You heard it here in 5 towns. If you write a Sefer Torah and you give it to a shul, you lose the mitzvah. You know why? Because you have to own the Sefer Torah. If you gave it to the shul, it's not yours anymore. So what's the mitzvah? Is it writing it? Or is it owning it? So you say maybe the mitzvah is to own it. What's the halacha? If someone's father wrote a Sefer Torah, father passes away, and then you inherit it. Do you get the mitzvah? No! But it's mine! But I didn't write it. So what's the mitzvah? Is the mitzvah to write it? Or is the mitzvah to own it?
How about donating it?
There's no mitzvah in the Torah to donate. Either to write it, or to own it. That's what, people think when they write a shtar, almost nobody donates Sefer Torah to shuls. They always write a shtar, they could take it back. They think they're doing it because they want to be able to keep it. They don't realize they have to do that.
99-year loan.
99-year loan, exactly. So the Avnei Nezer, listen carefully. If you write a Sefer Torah and then you give it to someone as a gift, you lose the mitzvah. So maybe that means you have the mitzvah to own the Sefer Torah. No, that can't be, because if you inherit your father's Sefer Torah, you don't get the mitzvah even though you own it. Why? Because you didn't write it. So is the mitzvah writing it or is the mitzvah owning it? The answer is none of the above. The act of the mitzvah is writing it, and the fulfillment of the mitzvah is owning it. The Maisa mitzvah is ksiva, the kiyum ha-mitzvah is ownership. It's one of the only mitzvahs that have two facets. Normally the Maisa and the kiyum are hainu hach, one and the same. But on rare instances, the act and the fulfillment are actually broken up. For example, the ksiva Sefer Torah. Writing the Sefer Torah is the act of the mitzvah. Therefore, if you inherit the Sefer Torah and you own it, you don't get the mitzvah because you didn't do the act. And if you write it and you don't own it, you did the act, but you don't have the fulfillment because you don't own it. Well, says the Avnei Nezer, and says Parsha Shechter and of Soloveitchik, and we'll see Reb Chaim says the same thing from Rabbi Sol Salanter. And I'm always saying like this because this is how I heard it. I'll give you another example. Simchas Yom Tov. What's the mitzvah? What's the act? Eating meat. But what's the fulfillment? The fulfillment is the simchas halev. If I'm besimcha but I didn't do the act, I don't get the mitzvah. In other words, I'm in a good mood and I didn't eat the meat, I don't get the mitzvah. The act is eating the meat. The fulfillment is the state of simcha, or avelus. Layaleinu. The maisa of avelus is the conduct of mourning. The kiyum of avelus is the feeling of avelus belev. Comes the Avnei Nezer and the Sefer Eretz HaTzvi, and I'm going to read to you the words of Reb Chaim also after. Shofar is a rare instance that the act and the fulfillment are not the same. Listen carefully. The act of shofar is blowing the shofar. The fulfillment of shofar is listening to the sound of the shofar. I'm not mekayim anything when I blow a shofar. I don't fulfill anything when I blow a shofar. I only fulfill when I listen. But it's not enough to listen, because it has to, since the Torah says Tika usakatem, it has to come al yidei maisa. I'll ask you a question. Let's say I'm tired. It's 9:17. It's been a long day for me. Could you put on tefillin for me tomorrow morning? I'll get some extra sleep. And you'll put on tefillin for me. Could you put on tefillin for me? No. Why not? Because it's a mitzvah shebegufa. You can't put on tefillin for me. So how could you blow shofar for me? What's the difference? If you can, could you sit in a sukkah for me? No. Could you put on a talis for me? No. Could you take daled minim for me? No. Why could you blow shofar for me? What's the difference? It's a big difference. You can't fulfill mitzvahs for me. You could do mitzvahs for me. Since when it comes to tefillin, the fulfillment is putting it on. You can't fulfill a mitzvah for me. So most mitzvahs that the fulfillment and the act is the same thing, you can't do for me. Shofar, you can't listen for me. I have to listen. But blowing is not the fulfillment. It's just the act. So you could do it for me. So basically, there's a revolutionary understanding in the mitzvah of shofar. There are two parts of the mitzvah. It's like writing a Sefer Torah is the act, owning it is the fulfillment. So I have a question for you. Could you own a Sefer Torah for me? No. But you could write it for me. How could you write a Sefer Torah for me? You can't put on tefillin for me. The answer is you can't put on tefillin for me because you can't fulfill the tefillin for me. But you could write a Torah for me because you're not owning it for me, you're not fulfilling it for me, you're just doing the act. An act a shliach could do. So you could blow shofar for me, says the Avnei Nezer, because blowing shofar is not the fulfillment of the mitzvah, it's just the act of the mitzvah. Memela, it comes out, the Rambam is 1,000% in the safe. The Rambam writes 8 times, the mitzvah is to listen to the sound of the shofar. That is the kiyum mitzvah. Why does the blower have to have the listener in mind? Because at the end of the day, everybody has to do an act. And in order for you to transfer your act to me, you have to be moitzi me. Not in the kiyum ha-mitzvah, but in the maisa ha-mitzvah. That's why a cheresh shoyt v'katan, aside from the fact that it can't produce a halachic sound, can't muster up enough das to transfer the act to me as well. So then it comes out like this. Every Jew is obligated to listen to the shofar, and every Jew is obligated to blow the shofar. And it could be there is no machlokes at all. Nobody argues. The kiyum ha-mitzvah is listening. But it doesn't mean that the smag is incorrect to say there's a mitzvah to blow the shofar, there's a mitzvah to blow the shofar. That's not the fulfillment of the mitzvah, that's the act of the mitzvah. The machlokes between the Rishonim is merely as follows. When you have a mitzvah that has 2 parts, such as shofar, where there's a mitzvah, where there's an act of blowing and a fulfillment of listening, how do we formulate the bracha? Is the formulation of the bracha based on the kiyum, the fulfillment? Or is the formulation of the bracha based on the maisa? So it could be the Smag and the Rabbeinu Tam and the Shultis and the Rambam, the Shama, so they all agree. Everybody agrees. There's a fulfillment. The way you fulfill shofar is by listening. The proof is, if you blow a shofar and you don't hear it, you're not yotzei, because the kiyum ha-mitzvah is listening. But everybody agrees that if the toikeah is not mechavin to be moitzi the shomea, la yatsa, because there's no way to transfer the maisa to the listener. The question is, you have a mitzvah, how do you formulate the bracha? Do you formulate the bracha litzkaya? And that's why the Smag says, the Shulta says, you say Asher Kedisham says it's on a litzkaya b'shofar. And the Rabbeinu Tam says, Yesh levarch al tkiyah shofar. Does that mean he holds that blowing is the kiyum? No. He could agree to the Rambam listening is the kiyum, but maybe the proper way to formulate his bracha is based on the act. And the Rambam disagrees. The Rambam says, no. The way you formulate a bracha is, the formula of a bracha is based on the fulfillment, the kiyum. Or you could say, different ways of saying it. I heard Rabbi Sack said that first way, and in Rabbi Shechter's Sefer he says it the following way. Actually vice versa. You could say it like this. Everybody agrees the proper way to formulate a bracha is on the act. And you only make a bracha on the act. But since at the time that you're doing the act, you're mekayim the mitzvah, so it's correct to, the bracha is going on the blowing, and you make the bracha when you're about to blow, but the formulation is describing the fulfillment of the mitzvah. But either way, there's a completely different way of understanding the machlokes Rabbeinu Tam and the Rambam. Simply, they're arguing in, what's the mitzvah? Is it blowing or is it listening? No. This is a completely different way to understand it. The mitzvah of shofar has two parts to it, two components. The act, which is blowing, and that needs to be transferred, and then the fulfillment. You can't fulfill mitzvahs for other people. You can't get the credit of a mitzvah for another person, but you could do the act of a mitzvah for another person. I'll give you an example of what it means to make a bracha on an act and not necessarily on a fulfillment. By Sfiras HaOmer, we know there's a famous shita of the Bahag. Almost nobody agrees with it, but we're choishish for the Bahag L'halacha. And that is, if you miss one night, you're done. Right? Sfiras HaOmer, everybody knows all or nothing. It's one. Even though most Rishonim disagree, most Rishonim say every night is an independent mitzvah, the Bahag holds it's one long mitzvah, and therefore if you miss a night, you're out. We're choishish for that shita, and that's why if we miss a night, we don't make a bracha. So there's a sefer in the Rishonim, Sefer HaMachriya, who asks on the Bahag, if Sfiras HaOmer is one long mitzvah, why would you make a bracha every night? In other words, if the Bahag would say, if you miss a night, you're one and done, you're out. Why? Because it's one long mitzvah, so then you should make a bracha, night one, and that should cover you for 49 days if it's one long mitzvah. So the Brisker Rav says, wait a second. Yes, it's one long mitzvah. What does that mean, it's one long mitzvah? That means, when do you fulfill the mitzvah? When do you get credit for the mitzvah? If you did everything, if you did every night. But I have a question. That's the kiyum ha-mitzvah. The kiyum ha-mitzvah is when you did all 49 mitzvahs. What's the act of the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer? 49 different acts. Says the Brisker Rav, we make brachos on acts, not on fulfillments. So of course it's one long mitzvah in terms of you fulfill the mitzvah when you've completed everything. But the maisa, I want to take a look, it's in number 28. The mitzvah is, the act of the mitzvah is every night counting. And therefore,
So if you miss one night, should you be yotzei with someone else?
Well, halach l'maisa, you should. You should. If you miss a night, we don't make a bracha because we're choshish for the Bahag. But if you miss a night, since most Rishonim say you could really make a bracha yourself, if I'm not mistaken in Brisk, they do make a bracha every night, even if you miss a night. I think they're not choshish for the shit of the Bahag. But lamaisa, if you miss a night, you should. We go like the Shulchan Aruch. you're yotze with somebody else. On the other hand, we find instances that you make a bracha on a kiyum ha-mitzvah and not on the maisa. For example, I'll give you one example. It became very popular when you buy a new house, you invite the rabbi or the rebbe, and he comes and he puts up your mezuzah. And who makes the bracha? The rebbe. So, what? The question. The rebbe has no mitzvah to put a mezuzah on your house. You have the mitzvah. How could he make a bracha? How could he make a bracha on your mitzvah? I mean, in other words, who gets the kiyum ha-mitzvah when that mezuzah is put up? The owner of the house. So how's he making the bracha? So the Reb Chaim, the Chidushei HaGrach, says, like the Brisker Rav, you can make a bracha on a ma'isa mitzvah. He didn't get credit for a mitzvah. He's not in Shamayim. He's not going to get schar for the mitzvah mezuzah, but he did the act of a mitzvah, of kviyas mezuzah. So that's a raya. You can make a bracha on a ma'isa mitzvah. On the other hand, there's a Magen Avram. Magen Avram says, let's say you're thinking of buying a house, and for whatever reason you put up a mezuzah before you moved in. So you for sure don't get credit for the mitzvah yet. When you move into the house, you can make the following bracha. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu ladur b'bayis sheyesh by mezuzah. But I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing a ma'isa mitzvah then. I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of having a mezuzah on a door. So you see that sometimes a mitzvah, a bracha, could be formulated on the act, like we see by Sfiras HaOmer, that even if it's one long mitzvah, the bracha is on the act, and yet at times a bracha is formulated on the fulfillment. And therefore, basically, what we can take out of the shiur is really, if you appreciate the narrow space that the Shas is putting. In other words, if you put all the Gemaras together, on the one hand, we know if you blow shofar and you don't hear it, you're not yotze. That means you need to hear it. On the other hand, a cheresh shayt v'katan can't blow. That means you need to blow it. So the Shagas Aryeh has the simplest approach. There are two parts of the mitzvah. You need to do both they're both part of fulfilling the mitzvah. But it doesn't seem to fit in the Rambam. The Rambam seems to say the mitzvah is listening. And the approach of the Avnei Nezer and Reb Chaim Brisker is, it's a really revolutionary understanding. This is the way the Avnei Nezer explains it, that there are certain mitzvahs where the act of the mitzvah is separate from the fulfillment of the mitzvah, just like writing a Sefer Torah, the act is writing it, the fulfillment is owning it. By Shofar, the act is blowing it, and the fulfillment is listening to it. And possibly everybody agrees to that, and the only machlekes is, so how do we formulate the bracha? Do you formulate the bracha on the act, or do you formulate the bracha on the fulfillment? So, we hope, b'siyata d'shmaya, we will all be zoicha, to mekayim, both the maisa of Shofar, and the kiyum of Shofar, and listening. So I just want to read to you the words of Reb Chaim Brisker in the new Chidushei HaGrach. B'shem HaGrach, zecher tzak levracha, ha'tekiya hi ma'isa ha-mitzvah, v'hashmiya hi kiyam ha-mitzvah. And he even brings over here, from Rav Ruderman, who said the same idea, and Rav Ruderman said, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, therefore, would call out in a shul, that not only should you be mechavein, to be mekayim the mitzvah by listening, you should also be mechavein to get the act of blowing transferred to you as well. And that was in line with what we're saying from the Avnei Nezer, that the ma'isa is the tkiyah and the kiyum is the listening. Rabbi Say, Shiur, incisive chsima toiva. Hashem, we should be zoicha, the mitzvah of tkiyah shofar should be melotz ba'adenu for a year of simcha sanacha. Shkoyach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.